I've been going through old projects lately to tie up loose ends I've been procrastinating on. I featured this Mac SE in a previous episode where I installed a CPU accelerator card to explore just how much performance it offered. When I was done, I put the machine back to stock, but I've since changed my mind and want to leave the card in permanently. The accelerator came to me already installed on a motherboard, which made it easier to swap in. This left me with the SE's original board, which I didn't have an immediate use for. I don't really want to get into the habit of hoarding spare parts, but it would be a waste to get rid of it since it works. Then I was reminded of something at least a few people did back in the 80s, and before long found myself following in their footsteps. In the August 1988 issue of Computer Shopper, a curious article described a so-called Hackintosh. It argued that instead of paying full price for a Mac, one could essentially build their own using mostly commodity parts. You'd still have to source a motherboard, and it explained how original Mac 128K, 512K, and Plus boards were available from the used market, or from dealers who had performed motherboard upgrades on their customers' machines and had the old ones left over. But everything else needed to make your own Mac could be bought from PC parts vendors at lower prices than what Apple charged. Of course, with a name like Hackintosh, going this route certainly didn't give you the prettiest of results. Look close and you can see how the I/O panel on the back of the case has been cut off with a hacksaw to accommodate the motherboard's ports. The article also admitted that support would be a difficult thing to come by, with no dealer wanting to touch the machine if it had problems. But the prospect of a cheaper, more customizable Mac was an interesting one to at least a few people. One of those was Bob Brandt, who wrote a book on the topic. Build Your Own Macintosh and Save a Bundle was published in 1991, with the second edition coming a year later. Brandt was clearly passionate about the topic of what he called catalog or cat Macs, referring to the mail-order catalogs one would source parts from. He showcased several machines that he'd built for himself or his consulting firm's customers, and spent a considerable number of pages basically trying to talk you into the whole thing, with charts and cost-benefit analyses to prove his point. Naturally, as a book, it was able to go much more in-depth than the Computer Shopper article could. It shared wiring diagrams and step-by-step instructions for assembling your own cat Mac. Brandt provided specific part numbers and even mail-order retailer information, so it certainly gives the impression that this topic was approachable by the average computer user. Well, that is until you get to sections talking about needing to do your own metalworking to get a Mac motherboard to fit in a standard PC case. Custom back panels were available in some situations, but not all. Cat Macs were very much still a DIY and at-your-own-risk endeavor. The book is a fascinating look into an aspect of computing that I had honestly never heard of previously. Supposedly 25,000 copies of the first edition had been sold, and even though I was fairly plugged into the Mac ecosystem in the early 90s, I'm surprised I'd never come across it before. In some ways, cat Macs don't feel too far off from what vintage computing has evolved into today, with enthusiast-made parts feeding a cottage industry for a niche hobby. And that brought me back to my spare Mac SE motherboard. What if I used it in some kind of modern cat Mac project? As it turns out, I'm far from the first person to come up with the idea. I found a design for a desktop case on printables created by fellow YouTuber Gutbomb, and I immediately knew what my next project would be. The case is meant to be 3D printed, but at about 295mm wide, it's far too big to print as is using my Prusa Mini. The motherboard alone is larger than the size of its bed. Gutbomb had thought of this and created a version of the case that could be printed in segments, and while I knew the Mini would be up to the task, I wasn't thrilled by the prospect of visible seams. Thankfully, the folks over at Prusa Research caught wind of what I was up to and offered to help. They sent out a Core 1L, which I was thrilled to get unboxed. I've genuinely been a big fan of Prusa ever since I bought my Mini in 2020. It's been an incredibly reliable printer for me, and I've always appreciated how Prusa operates as a company. Their strong support of open source, right to repair, and information security is refreshing in the face of their competition and, well, most other technology companies these days. If you've watched many of my previous episodes, you probably know that 3D printed parts crop up somewhat frequently, but I don't often talk about the printer itself. I consider myself rather utilitarian in this regard. I view 3D printers as tools and don't want them to become hobbies unto themselves. The Core 1L should fit the bill nicely then, as it's as much of a workhorse as Prusa's other models. And with a bed size of 300mm wide and deep, it's plenty big to print the CatMac enclosure parts in one piece. Setup was quick as the Core 1 arrived pre-assembled. I just needed to snap the control panel in place, remove a few bolts securing the bed for shipping, and attach the spool holder. For filament, there's really only one choice to go with, PLA from Polar Filaments in a color called Retro Platinum. Joe's Computer Museum worked with Polar to offer this color, which is about as close a match as one can get to the one Apple used in its products from the late 80s through the late 90s. I figured the case parts would be a good test for the Core 1. The top and bottom each takes about 10 hours to print, with sufficient details to make it obvious if there was anything in particular the printer struggled with. They printed without a problem on the first try, and while removing the support material, I found the print quality to be quite nice. My biggest concern was if there was any warping, since these parts used almost the entire bed area, but I was impressed to find that they came out perfectly flat. While I had the filament loaded, I had the printer take care of the rest of the parts, namely the drive tray, rear panel, and a few odds and ends. To install everything in the case, I picked up an assortment of heat-set inserts, which will come in handy for future projects as well. These are easy to install using a clever method. Just align the insert with the corresponding boss in the plastic, then use a soldering iron to heat it up and press it into place. I would need some other parts to bring my CatMac to life, some of which I bought from Joe's Computer Museum. The most important one is this, the SE Combo. It does a few things. First, it allows you to use a normal ATX power supply to power the Mac SE motherboard, and second, it uses a Raspberry Pi Pico to take the video output and convert it into a VGA signal. Joe worked with Ron's computer videos to put this one together, who I understand is quite the CatMac aficionado, and at $60 US, it comes at a reasonable price. Alongside it, I picked up a pre-wired power switch for just a couple of bucks. I had a leftover Pico PSU from another project that would work out perfectly here. It's rated for 90 watts, which is way more than enough, and includes a nice pre-wired DC input jack. These things are impressively small and should fit in the CatMac case just fine. For storage, I decided to throw in an original floppy drive for completeness, though the bulk of the work would be done by a Blue SCSI, which, as we'll see, has really nice integration with the case. Just a few more odds and ends to round out the build. A bag of screws to match the standoffs, SCSI, floppy, and motherboard cables, and a speaker which a viewer kindly donated. It was missing its wiring harness, but I was able to solder a couple of pins to its input terminals and use jumper leads instead. Then it was time to put it all together, starting with the SE Combo. My Pico PSU was a 20-pin version, but that's totally fine, and before the wiring got too involved, I plugged in a couple of jumper leads for the external power LED. These threaded inserts are really nice to work with. They're something I should try to incorporate more often in my own 3D printed parts. After I got the speaker fastened, I turned to the back panel and installed the DC input jack, the VGA output which resides on its own daughter board, and finally the power switch. Buttons for the reset and interrupt switches needed to be placed in the case next, and then I could get the motherboard fitted, which has to go in at the same time as the back panel. All of the threaded inserts lined up perfectly. Gutbaum did a really good job designing this case, and I could secure the back panel in place next. Time for a bit of wiring, with the power switch getting plugged into the SE Combo, followed by the motherboard harness. In case you don't have a spare floating around like I did, Joe's Computer Museum has replacements available for sale. The DC input jack got plugged into the Pico PSU, the VGA ribbon went to the SE combo, and my new speaker wiring fit into the header on the motherboard just fine. The drives were next. I needed to remove this outer housing from the floppy drive, the screws for which I could reuse to secure it to the bracket. The Blue SCSI needs 3 standoffs, which are screwed to the drive bracket from underneath, then the Blue SCSI is fastened from the top. It's worth noting that as the hole locations in Blue SCSI version 2 models changed over time, the drive bracket is only compatible with revision 2023.09 or later. Just a little bit of assembly left. I got the drive tray fastened to the bottom case and the floppy drive connected. I was a little annoyed with the SCSI ribbon cable as I had to do this somewhat awkward fold to get it to line up with the orientation of the sockets, but it cleared the motherboard wiring harness, so whatever. There's a cutout in the top case for a power LED, which uses a 3D printed light pipe. I picked up an assortment of LEDs, and the light pipe allows one to friction fit pretty nicely. A neat trick I learned is to crop the legs shorter, then use jumper leads for an easy solder-free connection. The light pipe likewise friction fits into the case, then I could connect the 2 power LED cables together. The top case drops into place and gets secured with a few screws on the back and a couple under the front bezel. A set of rubber feet on the bottom, and I was done. Well, not quite. I needed a monitor for this thing. I found a new old stock 15-inch LCD on eBay for cheap, made by a company I'd never heard of called Etronics. It being a 15-inch model is important, partly for its size, which I figured would fit in with the Cat Mac pretty well, and also for its native resolution, which we'll talk about in a bit. While a CRT would have looked more appropriate for the 80s, I wanted an LCD for a dash of retro-futuristic feel, and also because they weigh much less and won't crush the Cat Mac's case. I'll admit I'm not 100% happy with this monitor, namely because it was advertised as beige, but is closer to white. The power supply is more the color I was going for. But that's okay, it'll fit in fine, especially considering that Cat Macs were always a little slapdash to begin with. The cutout in the front next to the power LED is for the Blue SCSI's SD card, and I had copied over a pre-made disk image. This Cat Mac SE doesn't need much power, and I figured a 36-watt AC adapter would be plenty. The port layout on the back makes for a tidy cable arrangement, and when I powered everything on, the machine sprang to life and started to boot. Until it stopped, that is, due to a system error, which was my fault as I had mistakenly copied the wrong disk image to the SD card. But with System 701, the Cat Mac works great, despite its maximum of 4 MB of RAM. Performance-wise, the SE is no faster than the Mac Plus and others that came before, but it's still got enough horsepower for Shufflepuck Cafe and similar classic games.
This guy sucks.
The monitor's native resolution of 1024 by 768 is perfect for this application, since that horizontal number is exactly double the SE's 512 by 342. This means there's no interpolation, so the image is incredibly sharp, though it leaves some non-intrusive black bars above and below. The backlight strobing is worse on camera than in real life, though given this monitor's dubious quality and the fact it's probably 20 years old, I wouldn't be surprised if I need to replace its capacitors sooner rather than later. Still, I'm really happy with how all of this turned out. From a distance, the case doesn't look 3D printed at all, and up close it would only take a small amount of sanding to get it perfect. I'm impressed with how well the Core 1L did. Big thank you to Prusa, of course, for sending it my way, and I'm looking forward to putting it to work on future projects. Of course, I've included a link in the description to more info if you're interested. Gutbomb, Joe's Computer Museum, and Ron's Computer Videos, among others, also deserve a lot of credit for making crazy ideas like this a reality for all of us. It's seriously impressive what the vintage computing community has come up with. But most of all, I'm just glad I was able to put some spare parts to good use. This may be a new build using modern components and technologies, but it's clear that the spirit of the Cat Mac lives on. I think Bob Brandt would be proud. If you liked the video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Here's another episode you should check out, and as always, Thanks for watching.